Greetings and salutations, fellow plebs. Today we shall be examining the brain of a rather curious specimen, the social justice warrior, sometimes referred to additionally or substitutively by the designation progressive. If you will afford me a brief digression, the label progressive was actually first introduced by a colleague of mine, Dr. Painful Irony, a brilliant if somewhat frustrating man. Anyway, let us begin with the examination, shall we? I do hope you're all as excited as I. My attention is immediately drawn to this section of the brain here, that appears to feature some sort of cybernetic augmentation, not unlike the Borg from Star Trek, only less green. If my assumptions are correct, this would be an EGM, or Embedded Groupthink Microchip. It is believed that the implant allows for constant communication with the rest of the collective, ensuring that no individual ever stray from the narrative of the moment. Just to the left, one will note the growth of a gender node, so named because it dictates gender identification in the subject, along with a need to view the world through the lens of gender politics. If we take a closer look, we might be... yes, this specimen appears to have once identified as mayonnaise. I must confess, I wasn't aware that one's gender could be a condiment. Just goes to show how behind the times I am. Huh, kids these days. Further to the left still, we find the entitlement synapse. The size of each adjoining gland will have been determined by the subject's yearly income and other markers of success. We can deduce from the enlarged victim gland and nanny state behavior enabler that the subject was either incapable of or unwilling to accept that money must be earned. Receiving undeserved funds would ordinarily produce an acute sense of guilt. Alas, in the brain of the progressive, the guilt gland is inversely proportional to the victim gland. Therefore, as the subject's sense of victimhood increases, so its feeling of guilt for behaving like a complete and utter tool decreases. At the left edge of the brain, we have what, unfortunately, appears to be the growth of a smarter-than-thou tumour. So rampant was the spread of arrogance that the subject's sense of humour cell was reduced to all but nothing. The po-faced bugger was probably completely unable to distinguish between humour and sincerity. Adjacent to these, we find perhaps the most debilitating anomaly of all, the self-awareness centre. Its yellow nucleus should enable the subject to examine itself objectively, to curb hypocritical and otherwise disagreeable behaviour. Because of its abnormally thick cell membrane and cell wall, however, it seems unlikely the subject would ever have been able to gain access to self-awareness. Indeed, I suspect that, while alive, the individual probably would have been capable of whining about imagined harassment before proceeding to harass anyone who dared to offer a contrasting point of view. Poor sod. The three jelly beans nestled in the upper left corner are in fact the work ethic molecule, personal responsibility node, and common sense particle. Given that all three are unusually small, it would be reasonable to assume that, when living, the subject would have been entirely useless, and blissfully unaware as to how truly useless they were. We move now to the moral relativity grey area, nestled inside which is the progressive's trademark double-think section. The latter enables the subject to hold totally contrary beliefs at the same time, as and when the need arises. Fascinating, really. While one might ordinarily experience cognitive dissonance when confronted by two contradictory thoughts or pieces of information, the social justice warrior, by contrast, has evolved to accept both while dismissing the inherent contradiction. For example, and this is completely hypothetical, a female progressive could quite sincerely cry, "Women are being denied a voice," while speaking to a conference hall full of attendees at an event for women's issues whose organisers invited her and other women to speak, and see absolutely no flaw in her reasoning. She might even go on to state that we live in a patriarchal society that harms men. Baffling, really. Absolutely baffling. Situated just to the right of the grey area is the faux indignation sulcus. This is absolutely pivotal to the social justice warrior's way of life, for it ensures that no matter how trivial or inconsequential the issue, say, for example, the pattern of a scientist's shirt, the subject will be convinced that it is offended, and what's more, that everyone should care about that fact. Upon discovery of the faux indignation sulcus, my colleagues and I posited whether progressives may be innately disposed to ethical solipsism, whether there might in fact be an SJW gene of sorts. We refer to it as the I feel, therefore you should be gene. I see that below the sulcus sits the crown jewel, the dog's bollocks, if I may be so crass. This is the political correctness lobe, without which the subject would simply be incapable of functioning. We believe that it dictates which words may acceptably be used, and in turn those that may not. It tricks the subject into believing that multiculturalism is not only a good thing, but that it is without flaw, that a country's own flag is a symbol of oppression, but that everyone else's flag is merely an innocuous expression of identity, and that discrimination against a person based on their race or gender is unacceptable, unless that person happens to be male and/or white. Now, this very unusual, shuriken-looking gland is in fact the soft spot, also known as the safe space. It appears to act as a place of refuge for the social justice warrior when inconvenient information is being presented to it. It is said to produce warm fuzzies. Now, while in most humans the heart is situated behind the sternum, among progressives it appears to reside in a corner of the brain. What's more troubling still is that the heart appears to be perpetually bleeding. Moving now to the right edge of the brain, we find what could only be described as an enormous plug. A stopper. A bung. What, one might ask, is such a thing doing in a person's brain? An excellent question, to be sure. As far as I can deduce, the stopper, tethered to the political correctness lobe as it is, must function as a thought filter of sorts, preventing incorrect thoughts from entering or leaving the brain. You see, while social media may offer one the option to simply block those who dare to offer a conflicting opinion, interactions in real life aren't quite so accommodating. As a consequence, this particular social justice warrior appears to have developed a mechanism for filtering out undesirable information. This, good people, is an example of regressive evolution at work. Extraordinary. Taking down the insanity by just a smidgen, one will note the presence of a Marxism shrine below the think stopper. For social justice warriors, it is cultural Marxism that fills the space left vacant by the absence of critical thinking. For those unfamiliar, it is my understanding that cultural Marxism is central to the decline of the humanities, culture, and civilization in general in the Western world. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. We move now to the Blame the West synapse. First, on the left here, we have the white guilt protuberance. If one has ever been curious as to why progressives insist that all white people should bear the alleged sins of their father's mate, this is why. Because, remember, in the mind of a progressive, no other race has ever done anything untoward. Ever. At all. Just white people. Moreover, all white people are guilty by association, however tenuous. Below it resides the guilt for history hypothalamus. This appears to act identically to the aforementioned white guilt protuberance, differing only in that it focuses the subject's attention on the past. It is thanks to the hypothalamus that we have Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. The final segment of the anti-West triumvirate would be the uncivil bellum, so named because it compels the subject to stoke racial, gender, and class tensions in their own countries. Thanks to the goading of this superfluous lump of bile, we have feminism instead of humanism. All lives do not matter, only black lives do, and instead of the 99% working together to reduce the growing wealth disparity, People such as myself are told, "Fuck off, you posh wanker," just because I say grass and not grass. Oh, and if anyone was wondering, the Super Saiyan eyebrow here is actually a patriotism node. Judging by the atrophied nerve endings, however, I very much doubt it was ever actually used. So, with the entirety of the brain examined, I feel confident in stating that the cause of death was unquestionably excessive exposure to logic and human decency. I should imagine that the bigoted bastard's think stopper came loose, and before it had time to scream, "La la 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 la, I can't hear you," it would have been all over. Thank you for joining me today, and please do remember, never go full social justice warrior.